Hey guys, sorry for the delay. I was busy with work and other important matters. Anyways, here's my Anomaly Arbitration Guide for Aquila and the Three Knights. Feel free to skip to any sections you need using the timestamps in the description, and let's just get straight into it. Starting with arguably the easiest or second easiest of the bunch, we have Knight 1. For this stage, enemies automatically take their turn if attacked 6 times, resetting at the beginning of their turn. Combined with two elites that love to inflict CCs, this pretty much forces a sustain most of the time, as well as sources of F-Res and Cleanse. Only Huohuo has the proper timing to negate Howling Casket's Terrified debuff, and with double attacks, the Aurumaton Spectral Envoy is capable of inflicting Reverberation and its subsequent stun on hit pretty much instantly, along with any other units that follow up after its debuffs. And once you get stunned, the action delay procs, which can't be cleansed. Still, cleansers are valuable, but resistors are preferred. With this being a 4 enemy stage with 6 squishier but still reasonably tanky mobs and 4 elites, Blast will usually ever so slightly edge out AoE, though luckily most AoE units in practice do have some sort of blast focus to their damage, be it erudition units like the Herda, Nihility units like Kafka and Acheron, and the whole Remembrance squad. Just bring whoever does the most damage. And finally, having a high hit count is generally advantageous, since you can stack hits on the Bubble Hounds for a stronger DOT upon death. Additionally, hitting the Howling Casket before your unit's next turn dispels their Terrified CC, so having your whole team able to attack is nice for protection as well. There's also just lots of hit energy to go around, with the only downside being that advancing the Aurumatons too frequently can lead to undesirable CCs, so do be careful. Max HP bleeds and enemies that advance their own turns is an obvious calling card for DOTs, but it also helps for counter units and Acheron with either Jiao Qiao or a Trend Sustain. Additionally, counter units generally have built-in survivability, taunt, and CC protection to live longer, while Acheron can capitalize on the on-death bleed debuffs to kill faster. Speaking of which, don't sleep on Clara, she's surprisingly competent if you want a comfy clear versus this stage. Casters' teams also appreciate the frequent attacks for lots of HP drain. Finon, Evernight, and the Herda are pretty strong matchups here, but elsewhere they're even better, so unless you have Knights 2 and 3 figured out, I wouldn't use them here. Saber and Aglaya benefit from lots and lots of hit energy this stage as well, though they are more vulnerable to CC and taking damage, so I'd use them with caution here. And finally, if you have no other choice, any of the High Cloud Quintet or your best single target DPS should be adequate to brute force through. As mentioned before, CC immunity is better than cleanse, and while Aventry and Fu Xuan are the undisputed king and queen for such a title, Hyacinth and Dan Heng are so offensively synergistic that they tend to come out on top due to the hit energy supercharging their ult rotations, letting them spam AoE hits to their heart's content. The same applies to Lingsha too, she just does less damage. Special shout out to Gallagher for being personally CC immune and SP positive, as well as a decent attack spammer behind the other 3 sustains above him. As for Huohuo and Luocha, well, while Huohuo can neutralize the Howling Caskets effortlessly, most teams nowadays can naturally cleanse Terra Grip without needing her help. And Luocha, well, he's a good heal bot, but just that. Use them where you can fit them. Since barely any supports have CC resistance or offer it to the team, we're really looking for high hit counts here. Tribi and RMC are great universal sources of it, with good amp and utility of their own, and both love the additional hit energy. Cyrene and Ceridra you're still using with their best in slot teams, mainly Chrysos heirs, but their offensive capabilities are the cherry on top versus this matchup. Robin and Sunday can also action advance completely to nullify action delay, with our Ice Remember supports mostly doing the same. If you have no other choices or want to save for support though, Ron May is an interesting pick due to her ult break mechanic accelerating how fast bleed turns occur, and if you're bringing physical weak, she of course lets you access break bleeds faster. Of course, otherwise, use whatever is best with your archetype, though I will say break hates regenerating toughness bars and advancing enemies, and Topaz's single target nature and Nomi RNG make her generally unfavorable versus this stage, unlike her preservation IPC partner. Similar to Wave 1 of our previous Night 2, or Old Pure Fiction if you really want to throw back, the 10 mobs don't all spawn at once. In fact, they enter in this specific order, with all of the elites being 158.4 speed and the mobs acting at 132. They do spawn 50% advanced, so do be mindful that killing a lot of enemies at once will usually result in another imminent wave of attacks. With only elites and mobs appearing on this stage though, the HP check is relatively low. Even with the elites having over 2 million HP and the mobs having around 400k, a total HP check of 10.73 million with only 20% res off element makes this stage quite manageable for most characters. Not to mention that with the lower EHR requirement, you don't actually have to build as much to meet certain guaranteed breakpoints, letting you instead lean into more useful stats. Xiao Cho can get away with 120% instead of the usual 177.8% versus 40 FRES bosses. Black Swan needs 138.1% to guarantee Arcana, which is only 18.1% past her EHR to damage conversion cap. And S5 Trend needs a shockingly low 19.1% EHR to guarantee a burn every single time. 100% base chance procs, which are most of the other EHR dependent debuffs, also only need 42.9% EHR rather than the usual 66.7%. Interestingly, this means that the Bubble Hound with the standard 36% effect hit rate for level 95 enemies has about a 95% chance to land his bleeds, thanks to its bleed base chance also being 100%. Yeah, enemies have EHR too, fun fact. Just hope you don't whiff on the 5%. Attack patterns here are relatively simple. The Bubble Hounds will always deal single target attacks, which get boosted by 50% if hit or inflicted with DOT. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure it works this way, since in practice this damage boost doesn't apply nearly as often, so less threatening than it seems. Per hit or DOT they take, they gain an extra bottle cap stack and inflict a bleed upon death for 2.5% max HP per stack for 2 turns, up to 10%. 20% max HP across 2 turns is obviously very OP, and Dot abuses this like crazy. As for the Aurumaton, turn 1 opens with a single target hit, followed by another single target hit with a medium chance to inflict Reverberation. Any allies hit while under Reverberation enter the strong Reverberation state, receiving a whopping 70% action delay and stunning them for 1 turn. Should an Aurumaton be present upon this happening, it will log upon one of those targets, and its next attack will change to Heaven's Fall, a single target attack that doubles in power, and removes strong Reverberation if the target still has it. Turn 2 is a single target hit that can inflict Reverberation, followed by an AoE hit with a low base chance to inflict Reverberation on 2 targets, or 1 if 3 targets are already under Reverberation. As for the Howling Casket, after 4 enemy attacks it will enter Moonrage, increasing its speed by 30%. Moonrage lasts for 167 AV, or just over a 0 cycle duration, and this also holds true for Hoolay and Knight too. Casket will normally always use a single target, then a blast attack, though under Moonrage, its next attack will immediately become instead a weak AoE that has a high chance to inflict Terror Grip. Notably, this AoE is 20 energy, absurdly high especially for such a weak attack, so most teams should be able to capitalize on it in some way. Terror Grip is an uncleansable status, requiring those afflicted to attack the Howling Casket before they take another turn to remove it. Otherwise, they are terrified and cannot act until their following turn. After this attack, Howling Casket will use a blast attack hitting evenly across 3 targets, hitting about 50% harder if the targets are terrified. Overall, really simple stuff, but do beware of the potential Aurumaton AoE into Howling Casket AoE combos that can easily stun 1 or 2 team members in quick succession. And also, if you remove the CCs, you take a lot less damage, so make that your priority if you can. Alright, now for the most notorious knight of the bunch. Taking 5 to 10% action delay randomly per attack versus Hoolay and his minions specifically has gotta be the most devious setup I've seen in a long while. Oh, and there's also a minor energy drain per attack, but honestly I wouldn't worry about this too much since enemy counts is low and hit energy is aplenty here. Plus 10 extra energy per kill to offset is always nice. As such, any ways to prevent your team from getting attacked and thus push down the cycle counter is pretty ideal. Certain characters have fun ways to counter this, like Anaxa with his ult CC, Boothill by just deleting Hoolay's toughness, action value, and HP bar in quick succession, and Yin Li who doesn't care much for delays. Oh, and Finon who just doesn't get delayed at all. There is definitely a favorite in this cast. As mentioned before, hit energy is aplenty, so you know what that means. Eagle and Dance 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 stocks through the roof. Plus Robin, who dodges delays while in her ult state and gets enough energy to naturally re-ult almost immediately. That being said, you'll want to pair these sources of action advance, should you use them, with enough speed to mitigate the action delay. -1 speed setups are pretty much dead on arrival unless you don't mind constantly losing turns. If there's a character you really don't want delayed as well, consider putting them on the outside so they don't get targeted by blast attacks nearly as often. With Hoolay being the real big bad at this stage, and the Wave 1 elites being easy by comparison, the best Hoolay counters are also the best Knight 2 counters, aka single target DPS, aka the men, and the Shinjo girlies, I guess. Oh, and Saber. Version 3 DOT just does a lot of raw damage, so their Hoolay matchup is also not too bad, especially with Kafka loving to spam eagle boosted ults. As much as I want to believe in Aglaya and Firefly, the average Currency Wars experience with heavy footfall should go to show how much high-speed DPS with breakpoints to meet really hate on-hit action delay. Sustain-wise, you really just want to end this fight ASAP as action delay can't be resisted or cleansed. Taunt-wise, Preservation and Remembrance units can soak more hits for themselves than Abundance units can. So that might be a consideration in favor of having them tank the slows over your DPS and supports. The Dan-Haya duo still remains supreme, though eventually can still perform insanely well should you have teams that can capitalize on his frequent follow-ups. Honestly, the damage check isn't too bad, as it's a lot of weak attacks in quick succession, which most characters, even with action delay, can shrug off. Plus, barely any cleanse to worry about. Do note that the action delay does usually force sustain though, as you're forced to tank more attacks than you normally would. Support-wise, whatever lets you get more turns, regardless of the order your team acts in, will usually reign supreme. This is the one fight where I can pretty comfortably say Trivi prefers DDD in most circumstances, even over her S1, just because hit energy is that plentiful and action delay is that prevalent. Though, to be honest, it might just be better to use Cypher or Silverwolf instead for their better matchups into single target content. Fugue is really only here if you're planning to run Boot Hill, as I once again can't really recommend in good faith running Rappa or Firefly versus this stage, especially when, spoiler, Knight 3 exists. Wave 1 opens with the same Howling Casket in Knight 1, plus a new elite in the E-Core Memo Sprite Winged Serpent. They have about the same tank stats, just with wildly different weaknesses, and the Serpent has 40 more toughness, making it harder to break. As for Hoolay, with 3.36 million HP, he's almost as tanky as the AoE boss we're about to cover, not factoring for damage reduction, and is harder to pin down with his 264 speed and 75% CC res to everything not named an Axis ult. His spawns are actually the same speed as the elites, though much squishier at 240k HP, and if I had to guess, they probably have a 50-50 chance of spawning here, unlike Apocalyptic Shadow where the ratio was 75-25 in favor of the Fire Weak Wolves. Attack patterns wise, the Winged Serpent is pretty simple. Turn 1 has a Fuel Blast attack with 50% of the damage being converted into Corrosion HP, then has it gain 5 Whirl stacks. Each hit the Serpent takes removes 1 stack of Whirl, followed immediately by a weak counter AoE if it can act. Yes, each counter also inflicts action delay, though luckily it's limited to 1 per turn, so turns with multiple actions queued up should only trigger 1 counter attack if I'm remembering correctly. If there are any Whirl stacks remaining by its next turn, it will then expend all its remaining Whirl to inflict a strong AoE with 50% corrosion, getting stronger the more Whirl it had left. Otherwise, it inflicts a single target attack, then charges up once more. Simple enough to deal with, just make sure to attack it lots in quick bursts, and break it ASAP if you can. As for the Howling Casket, check earlier in the video for his attack patterns as they're the exact same as in Knight 1. Alright, now for Hoolay. His normal attack pattern is pretty simple, with turn 1 being a single target and blast attack, and turn 2 being a single target and AoE attack. However, there's a couple more layers that make it extra challenging. For one, Hoolay will enter Moonrage after any 6 attacks between him and his Wolf Troopers, letting him act immediately. Speaking of which, one Wolf Trooper will immediately spawn at the start of the wave, followed by another every 100 AV. If Hoolay enters Moonrage, then the spawn timer will be pushed behind by 30%. Moonrage also causes Hoolay to gain 40% speed in Phase 1, or 80% speed in Phase 2, while it doubles the Wolf Trooper's attacks. It also attaches a bleed to each of the Fire Weak Wolves' attacks, and a 40% max HP heal to each of the Physical Weak Wolves' attacks. The attack doubling is definitely the more noteworthy part of this enhancement for the Wolf Troopers though, as Moonrage Hoolay starts a counter that begins at +5 for you and +3 for him. Each of your attacks adds +1 for you and -1 for Hoolay, and vice versa per Wolf Trooper attack. Hoolay, however, gains +2 per attack and -2 for you. Combined with the action delay in this fight, it makes it that much more likely that he hits +8 and uses his powerful random single target attack with Terror Grip, rather than you hitting +8 and reducing his toughness by 60. After either side wins, the count resets to +4 on both sides, though do note that if Hoolay won the duel, then you can't progress towards a win until his next turn. For some reason, they did remove his 20% AoE delay attack in Phase 2 when he enters Moon Rage, so have fun with that on top of everything else, I guess. Man, they really did not play nice with him, huh? Anyway, with the big bad Hoolay out of the way, let's move on to Night 3 with Banacademics. While the damage reduction debuff can be negated by breaking the enemy, it's way more so an AoE check overall. So in addition to Rappa and Firefly, traditional AoE crit units should also wipe the floor with this fight. The other thing to keep in mind is to have offensive ults at the ready to capitalize on Banana's mechanics, as hitting a TV between when it buffs you and before its next action causes it to buff a second time rather than turning angry. If you don't want to rely on offensive ults though, any ult paired with Tribute should do the work too. Interestingly, AoE with spammable offensive ults describes a lot of version 3 supports or support DPSs, and with the addition of Cyrene, they become genuine menaces versus this stage. The Herda dominates as always, though truth be told, Anaxa isn't far behind either, especially given how he always forces the Bananas to be happy after ulting, and how the Banana's effective HP is about Hoolay's HP. But Anaxa gets a 100% skill damage boost to offset the 15 to 30% damage reduction, which he can also eliminate pretty quickly as an Omni Breaker. Break also performs well as intended, but breaking Banacademics and denying the ability to abuse their mechanics is a double-edged sword, leaving crit to still perform better overall. Overall, just bring your strongest AoE or similar DPS, since this fight has very manageable HP and is by far the lowest damage check of the three. Sustains, real quick, look, if Hyacinth is a top tier DPS, of course she's also going to be a top tier among sustains. Order hasn't changed much compared to the other knights, just prioritize whoever has the strongest AoE offense on your team, or heck, go sustainless if you can, it's not a threatening fight. Supports wise, Tribute is the obvious cheat code. RMC also loves all the free potential energy in this fight, paired with an offensive ult, as do Saridra and the AoE Nihilities. It is crazy how AoE coded this fight is, like, legitimately. Wave 1 exacerbates this, with two very squishy elites relative to the other two stages, and squishier mobs to boot as well. Even with the 30% damage reduction in play, they're still far below the standard 300 to 400k mob HP, and 2 million elite HP standard set by this rotation. Wave 2, with the Bananas, has about 3.5 million HP, or about 4.55 million if you never break them per phase. Given how many buffs they can dispense as well, this really isn't all that much. 60 toughness on the side 4 mobs, and 120 toughness on the central elite is also decently low for a boss, perfect for Break and Anaxa teams to take advantage of. As for attacks, they changed the IPC senior staff leader to just attack then spawn IPC grunts every turn if possible, so yeah, AoE incentive much? Each of their summons adds 1 performance point to all IPC grunts, and each attack that they do gives itself 1 performance point. Performance points add 50% damage to the next attack, and can be stolen by either breaking or killing said enemy. Weird how break DPSs don't benefit from this, but that's neither here nor there. The Malefic Ape is the same simple ape we all know and love. Turn 1 has it locked onto a random target, staying locked onto the recent most skill user, followed by a damage boost and a single target smackdown on the locked on target for the next 3 turns. Rinse and repeat. As for the Banacademics, honestly there's a lot of info to cover here, so I'll just highlight the important parts. The leftmost alarm TV advances all enemies by 50% when angry and all of your characters by 50% when happy. Making it buff your team twice in a row means 100% action advance, but it acts pretty late, so time your ults properly and it's basically a mini Robin. The notorious energy TVs provide 50% max energy if happy, and are the prime target for double buff abuse since their happy buff can refund the ult that makes the ghost happy again. Also, 50% max energy is one heck of a benefit, and unlike in currency wars where breaking them makes them angry, breaking them makes them happy, so there is a slight positive incentive here. The Dino TV in the center will tutor itself and 2 or 3 random TVs in phase 1 or 2, locking them to be angry unless broken. It may sometimes be better to just keep it angry and have it use its AoE and blast attack, stopping the tutoring from happening at all. Especially since 10% attack for 2 turns isn't that great of a buff, and you can't ult cheese it to repeat that buff a second time, unlike the other TVs. Phase 2 is the same as Phase 1, but unlike most Phase 2s, the TVs do not advance themselves and take an immediate turn, instead staying at the same AV. Instead, the Banacademics main boss appears on the action order, acting at a bit over 100 speed for his first attack, and then about 80 speed for each subsequent attack. It gets delayed by 15% per weakness break, so breaks do offer some added security, but it's still gonna get to act if you don't kill the bananas fast enough. For its attack, it inflicts an AoE that's a mishmash of all the TV's negative effects, and also resets the TVs and makes them angry again. You lose 1 SP, all characters lose 20% energy and are inflicted with burn, and all enemies gain 20% attack for 1 turn. While it is a lot of effects, it's more annoying than it is deadly, unless you're running a sustainless setup where every energy and SP matters for survival. Overall, yeah, not really a hard fight by any stretch of the imagination. And finally, for the most baffling boss I've had to figure out attack mechanics for, Aquila. Truthfully, they aren't the most complex boss, they just have a bunch of weird one-off mechanics that don't behave consistently. Before I talk about the boss itself though, let's take a look at the King and Check specific buffs and debuffs first. Debuffs wise, the energy drain per hit debuff returns, but with 3 energy per hit instead of 2. Not great. Sunder is back, same as ever, but thankfully the HP drain per hit debuff is now gone, meaning you're less likely to cause your own demise. As for selectable buffs, each one is split into a buff that applies for the entire battle, plus a buff exclusive to Phase 3's Healing Rainbow. The first buff is for HP scalers, the third buff is for DOT, and Break, I guess, if you want to use it, just because speed is the only thing that they can use on this list, and the second buff is for just about everyone else. Note that the Healing Rainbow buffs are both stackable and permanent, meaning the longer the fight goes, the more and more powerful your DPS become, especially considering the plus 50% final damage boost at the 2 and 4 cycle marks. Strategy-wise, Aquila fluctuates between single target blast and AoE pretty frequently, so a team capable of dealing with all 3 is ideal versus this fight. Make sure that you're careful with managing the side HP bars on a blast and AoE team as well, since dealing damage past a certain threshold causes them to disappear, cutting down on your damage output significantly. In general, you'll want to rush to Phase 3 as soon as possible for that perma-ramping buff, as mentioned before, but it may also help to ensure that you have some AoE on hand to counter the charging mechanics on Phase 1 and 2 as well. DPS-wise, it really just is the Chrysos heirs on top, thanks to the addition of Cyrene to the roster. Mono Remembrance remains supreme, followed by Phynon, DOT, and surprisingly Maide, who by far gains the most out of the Cerebral Cyrene core if we're just talking damage. The rest of the version 3 DPS, like the Herta, Archer, and Saber, are just behind, while the version 2 Emanator sit at an E2 baseline with Eidolon supports to match. Just due to the power gap, most teams will need 2 or more Chrysos heirs on their team to clear, and this includes supports like Chibi and sustains like Hyacine and Dan. Speaking of said sustains though, to no one's surprise, they're by and far and away the best. The next best option, if no Hyacine or Dan hung, is surprisingly Gallagher, thanks to the sheer amount he heals per attack, in addition to his usual jack of all trades nature. I'm sure clears are possible with other sustains, but they're not really popular to say the least, and I question their ability to comfortably keep the team alive. Heck, Gala only gets away with a non-terrible rating because of his utility. His numbers are good enough, sure, but they sure aren't comfy compared to Amphorius' sustains. Supports-wise, once again, Chrysos heirs on top, along with Sunday just below thanks to his excellent Dan-Hung synergy. With how much of a damage check this fight is, unless you're offering something extra like E2 Silverwolf printing stacks for Acheron, Sparkle providing Archer with loads of SP, or Robin who depends on Fei Xiao for good ult uptime, it's really hard to justify picking many of the older supports. Break just lacks the DPS to finish Aquila in a reasonable amount of time, and older niche supports like Xiaoqiu and Topaz lack the vertical to keep up unless you go to like E6 levels of investment. As for boss stats, this is where I need to start doing some guesswork, because the listed HP values via the wikis I frequent and the reality of the battle don't match up. The 12.68 million HP per phase is pretty consistent, but the amount of HP that Aquila's side parts can take before disappearing varies quite a bit. The closer 100 eyes that don't act at all are tankier in Phase 1 than the outside Day Thunder Ravens, for instance, but that dynamic seems to flip in Phase 2. Additionally, if the outside Ravens, even if they don't take much damage, I've noticed that they tend to disappear anyways if Aquila drops below 2/3 of its health in Phase 1. This boss's specifics are really convoluted for no reason at all, I swear. It's fine for if you're just trying to casually clear, but if you have a better, more consistent explanation for anything mentioned in this video, please let me know in the comments because I am all ears, especially for Aquila at this point. In Phase 3, the 4 sidearms get replaced for 2 bones with about 1 million HP. They are quite squishy and don't deal damage, so managing damage so they take as much overkill as possible is crucial to winning quite a few matchups with them. Attacks-wise, Phase 1's main mechanic is temperature. The battle starts off with 40 temperature and increases by 1 every time an ally takes a turn, and 2 per Aquila attack. For every temperature above 40, the unremovable Fern Phase does 35 more damage, and Aquila themselves deals 1% more damage. Killing any of the parts reduces the current temperature by 20%, so there's a bit of a side mini-game where you want to kill them as efficiently as possible to keep temperature levels low. Turn 1, which is advanced 50% by the way, is a 6-hit bounce following the same spread damage logic as Anax's, followed immediately by an AoE attack. This really hurts, especially in a non-remembrance team where at least one member is forced to take a double bounce hit, and how it triggers before most sustains get to act. It also revives both 100 eyes one at a time if they are down, though this is more relevant on a re-rotation of this turn cycle. Turn 2 is another AoE and a fixed, not percentage, AV delay, which, weird, but it's 0.5 delay for every temperature above 30, so around 10 to 20 AV for most fights. It then charges and gains 40 Helium Flash, which you can reduce by 1 per every Aquila part hit. So single target hits would be -1, blast hits -3, AoE hits -5, and so on. Turn 3 revives 100 eyes and deals sheer damage equal to about 80 times the Helium Flash, so honestly not too much, even at its peak about 3200. The scarier part is how it converts all remaining Helium Flash to temperature, amping its damage and burn even more. The outside Day Thunder Ravens, when acting this phase, will increase temperature by 10, which can be reduced back down if they are weakness broken or killed. Phase 2 is much the same as Phase 1, just with thunderclouds instead of temperature as a mechanic. Instead of starting at 40, it starts at 0, capping at 35. Aquila also gains 5 thunderclouds per attack rather than 2 temperature, but no damage boost per thundercloud, and also the burn's gone. Instead, after turn 2, allies can steal thundercloud per Aquila part hit, rather than just reducing temperature. And every ally thundercloud that's had upon Aquila's thunderclouds hitting 0 reduces Aquila's max HP by 0.42%, or up to about 1/7 of its max HP for the cap of 35 thunderclouds. The Day Thunder Ravens also have weak single target attacks mixed in if acting before Phase 2 Aquila's turn 2, aka when it's not charged. As for Phase 3, Black Tide Sync Rate is the mechanic of choice, starting at 18%, growing by 4% per enemy action, and losing about 7% per bone killed, resetting to 18% if both bones are killed. Each attack also revives both bones to be killed again. Allies take additional true damage equal to 2 times the tide, so 36% extra damage on base. Both Black Tide and Healing Rainbow are added to the action order at this time, with Black Tide inflicting AoE Rot every enemy action, which reduces max HP by 10%. It acts pretty fast initially, then reasonably fast afterwards. Healing Rainbow, on the other hand, provides a stacking 1250 healing and max HP per action, which is fixed, in addition to the selected buff you chose, and removes 1 stack of Rot. While it acts pretty slow, every non-follow-up attack, including Aquila's, speeds up its progress by 3 action value, meaning it can act pretty fast if you want it to. Turn 1 inflicts a shared damage AoE, along with a hard-hitting single target hit that inflicts 2 stacks of Rot for -20% max HP. Turn 2 inflicts the same shared AoE, and a charge. And finally, Turn 3 deals a fixed AoE for 2,537 damage, ignoring defense but not shields. Why is it fixed? Why 2,537 damage specifically? I have absolutely no clue. So, what do I think overall? Well, going individually, I'd say I'd like this version Sustain Check way more since it's accessible to more archetypes to abuse, both rewards and punishes you for being more aggro, making it more complex, and doesn't resort to uninteractable, unkillable mobs to enforce its stage mechanics. The Break Check also feels slightly better, mainly because the Wave 1 elites aren't as oppressive as those Penacony dinos, and also because it's really just an AoE check in disguise, with Break being allowed to catch up. Still, with both sides being brute forceable, I find the mechanics to be acceptable, especially since 30% damage reduction is significant but not the end of the world. And, well, Hoolay just feels downright awful as a single target check, compared to Meme, who was a non-crit check. Hoolay's counters are arguably way more limited, since he's harder to brute force due to being more threatening if left unchecked. And the concept of not just delay, but random delay in a cycle-based game mode is really infuriating due to taking some agency out of the player's control. Doesn't help that his strongest counter, Phynon, is also the easiest DPS to pilot, and that the best strategy versus him is to prevent him from acting at all costs. Rewarding a lack of interaction is not it, fam. And finally, for Aquila versus Lygus, I honestly don't know. On one hand, I do like how fair Aquila is, especially since it serves as a pretty solid litmus test for how strong an endgame team can be, well, minus the energy drain per hit. Aglaya and Siglis Tribi really suffer here. On the other, there's a lot to learn from the Lygus fight, and conquering it genuinely feels like a challenge, especially when navigating around the different RNG paths that exist, from his random ult refunds, entanglements, deciding whether to kill his mobs or kill him, etc. On the other, RNG is still RNG, and Lygus' mechanics specifically reward Remembrance teams by name, mentioning Memo Sprites, and Phynon teams by design, so the matchup versus him is even more lopsided than it normally should be. Granted, you could argue that Everknight's E1 and Cyrede's Castorus buff help Remembrance teams shore up their lacking single target, making them strong regardless of enemy count, something Aquila changes a lot. Healing Rainbow also serving as a Castorus battery is also another unfair advantage, so it's not a level playing field by any means. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Also, I have a few other non-guide related videos I want to work on as well, so let me know if you're still interested in seeing the Apocalyptic Shadow guide video for this rotation, especially considering how both bosses are rerunning. Thanks for watching, and have a great day!